This is Horror Podcast.
Welcome to This is Horror, a podcast for readers, writers, and creators. I'm Michael David Wilson, and every episode alongside my co-host Bob Pastorella, we chat with masters of horror about writing, life lessons, creativity, and much more. Now today's guest is Tyler Jones for the second part of our conversation. He's the author of Criterium, The Dark Side of the Room, Almost Ruth, and Burn the Plans. And in this episode, we talk about the first story that Tyler fell in love with. We talk a little bit about Oasis, Patrick DeWitt, literary agents, and a lot more. But before we get into any of that, a little bit of an advert break.
Tried and True are done to death. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, revives even the most exhausted cliches with stories from some of horror's biggest names like Gemma Files, Gabino Iglesias, and Haley Piper. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, available October 18th anywhere you buy books online. Pre-order now. Use this code ThisIsHorror for 20% off through the month of October when you order direct from HungryShadowPress.com.
Hey, this is horror artist Lynn Hansen, and I'm really excited to be guest of honor at Horror on Main. You're gonna come too, right? We can all hang. See you there.
Horror on Main, a new weekend convention for the horror community. There are plenty of horror cons to choose from. We explore all the shadows within horror entertainment, including writers and actors, but also artists, publishers, directors, and composers, and we're bringing them to you. Join us Memorial Day weekend 2023 in Hunt Valley, Maryland. Come to the block party and meet your new neighbors. See HorrorOnMain.com for details.
Okay, with that said, here it is. It is Tyler Jones on This is Horror. And of course, you've mentioned so many great authors and great stories, but one thing I'm wondering is, when was the first time that you fell in love with a story? So what was the first story that you read that you just absolutely fell in love with?
First one was Huckleberry Finn. Yeah, that book, I became obsessed with Mark Twain after reading that book. And I read it so many times because I actually read that in Honduras. I think I was 10 or 11, and we didn't have many books down there at the time. So I read that one over and over again multiple times. It was like watching your favorite movie. You know how kids can watch the same thing over and over? It was like that, but with this book. And that, and then Tom Sawyer, I read that one multiple times, but Huck Finn always stood out to me. And that was the first book that really just floored me. And a lot of it was the voice. A lot of it was the story. And it's heavy, man. Like there's heavy stuff in there, even beyond the obvious storyline of Huck and Jim. I mean, you go back to the very beginning with Huck's dad being an alcoholic. Like there's just a lot of heavy stuff that kid learns along the journey. And I think the next big one that really just was like a missile right to my brain was It by Stephen King, which I read in junior high not long after coming back to the country. And I came across that book accidentally. I mean, long story short, I I actually went on this church trip, and we were going to drive in this van from Southern Oregon all the way up to the San Juan Islands in Washington, which are like the Seattle area. And we were going to spend a couple days on this island, like kayaking and stuff. And there was this girl on this trip, and we were sitting in the back seat of this van, and she had her backpack open, and I didn't know her. I'd never met her before. And I see this book cover in her backpack, and it's like a sewer grate with a claw coming out of it. I'm like, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked her if I could take a look at it. And this drive, mind you, is like an 8-hour drive. And I pick up the book and I open it up and I read the first couple pages. And the next thing I know, we're 8 hours later, like we're pulling into Seattle. And I didn't participate in that trip at all. I just sat in a chair and read that book from cover to cover. And that completely like rearranged me internally in terms of story, subject matter, complexity. I mean, you name it. That what an education in what a story can do and accomplish. And it's unique. It's one of those books that I mean, it's such a cultural icon now, but if you were to describe it to somebody who'd never heard of it, it could sound silly, but not when you're reading it. When you're reading it, it doesn't seem silly at all. Even the silliest parts of it don't seem silly when you are reading it. You know, like if you talk about it turning into a spider, like spiders don't scare me. I spent time in the jungle. Like spiders don't even scare me at all. Not even a little. But when I'm reading that book, man, like it's intense. So yeah, I'd pinpoint those two as like really, really important works for me.
So this might not be the question that people anticipate I would ask next, but what happened to the girl with the backpack? Did you become friends? Did you analyze it together? Was she kind of annoyed that you took her book for the whole damn trip?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So the way that it worked was, I think she was the friend of someone else. So I was hooked on the book, but I also there was this tension the whole time I was reading it because as you know, it's not a small book. And I'm a generally pretty quick reader, but still, it's a big book and it's dense. And I knew I have to finish this before we go back because I need to give it back to her. So like everything else that I don't think I went kayaking or crabbing or any of the other things that everyone else was doing. I just read knowing almost like it was due at the library kind of thing.
Yeah.
She hadn't read it. So it was just this thing that I stole from her for the weekend and finished it. And there was nobody I could talk to about it. Nobody I knew had read it.
I guess,
but then, when I got to high school and the high school library had all of Stephen King's books, I just checked them out one by one and read every single one of them.
And that was like your first Stephen King book at the time, was it?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. And what year would you say that was?
Oh gosh.
I know I had to ask a math question, huh?
Yeah, you sure did.
It wasn't fresh.
Early 90s.
I mean, it had been out for a while.
Yeah, like early 90s.
Okay. Yeah, because when that book came out, they were just like, unless you were in the industry, you really didn't know what books were coming out. Occasionally there'd be something in the newspaper that so and so. You really had to kind of dig a little deeper, back then because they didn't have the internet. Well, they did, but nobody had it. And I remember when that book came out, and it was they had at the library, there was a waiting list, and they would call you, just these little old ladies would call you, Robert. This is so and so from the Port Arthur Public Library. You had requested the new Stephen King. It's here for you, honey. And I'd be like, Mom, you got to take me to the library.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I remember it was like, man, he called the book It. He called it It.
Yeah.
Yeah. Weird. That's weird. But, man,
then it all makes sense.
Oh yeah, it does. And I have a love-hate relationship with the book, but I mean, be honest with you, it's a great book. And I love how we come to realize that it's in a way it's kind of first person, but it's not,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And
Yeah.
that was my first, I guess, little brush with kind of POV trickery,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That awareness of it can be more than just paragraph after paragraph, dialogue, paragraph. Yeah, what he does with the POV trickery, as you put it, is
Mm-hmm.
really, yeah. Well, in both the books I mentioned, Huck Finn and It, like those two sort of combined really illustrate my entire interest in writing in general, which is Huck Finn has voice,
Mm-hmm.
and then Stephen King, I think, uh, clarity. He's one of
Mm-hmm.
the clearest storytellers of all time. The fact that it is as big as it is and has been read by as many people as it has is a testament
Mm-hmm.
to the fact that it is like such a magnificent example of storytelling and clarity, because people don't would not read a book that size that was confusing.
Right.
So everything is just perfectly clear. The way it's told, the characters, the events, and there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of characters, a lot of moving pieces, and yet it's never unclear. And I value that in storytelling enormously.
Well, I've been reading a lot of your work recently in preparation for this podcast, and I mean, what's really great about it is how, so many sentences are imbued with this poetry, yet at the same time, you do have absolute clarity. So then I wonder, and really, this is the $1,000,000 question: how do you write sentences imbued with such artistic beauty and poetry without compromising clarity?
Well, first of all, man, thank you for that. That's wonderful to hear. Uh Boy, that's a big question. Uh I think clarity is number one. I do appreciate poetry and writing. I do appreciate um not eloquence so much as elegance. And I think there's a difference. I think eloquence tends to be a bit verbose, and elegance is finding the simplest way to say something beautifully. And a good example of that, I think, is Joe Lansdale. Like there are moments in his books where he has these sentences that are so simple and so beautiful. There's no other way to put it. But yeah, I try to. I think rhythm, in answer to your question, is a huge one. It has to have rhythm, and if a sentence is too minimalist and there's too many of them strung in a row, where it's just very very basic, uh, it gets monotonous. And so there's something instinctual in me that wants to break it up and make sure that there's some rhythm and some beauty in it. And if I'm, totally honest, I think that lyrics have something to do with that too. Like I listen to a lot of music. I'm a big fan of music, and there are lyrical ways of saying things. Certain words that are used in songs that, or phrases even, that you don't often see in writing. And once they appear within a story, they take on this like incandescent quality. Uh, does that make sense, what I'm saying about the music thing?
Yeah, it does. And it is making me wonder, who do you think are some of the examples of the best lyricists out there?
Oh, jeez. First example that comes to mind is Bob Dylan.
Mm,
So, love him or hate him, which he is one of uh, those artists that people either love or hate, mostly because of the voice, I think. But I have a book of all his lyrics. And if you read through his lyrics, there's a reason that he won the Pulitzer Prize. The turns of phrase that he uses are just absolutely remarkable, even from his earliest work. Yes, he's a storyteller, but he's also a poet, but he's also something else, and I don't know what that word is. But I recently had the opportunity to see him live in Portland just a couple months ago, and it was a great show. He played at this theater called the Arlene Schnitzer Theater, and it's not a very big place. I think it holds like maybe 2,500 people tops. Actually, it might even be less than that, but fairly small. And it was the first concert that I've been to in years. And at the door, there was some company there that I suppose that Bob had employed, and they slip your phone inside a bag, and they lock it up. So you can't use your phone to take pictures or video or anything. So you walk into this theater and everybody has their phone in bags. And the only way they can get to it is to run back outside and have one of these employees unlock it for them. So what you end up with is a theater full of people 100% engaged in what's happening. They're experiencing the concert through their own eyes, through their own ears, not through a screen and how good does the video look or how's the picture look. And it was a really cool experience, and which I would have done anyway. I'm not one for taking pictures at concerts, but just sitting there listening to him, he played almost his newest album almost entirely. I think almost every song from it except one. And I was listening to the words of the songs in a way that I haven't. I've listened to the album a couple times, but hearing him sing it live, it hit differently. And I realized just how powerful his lyrics are. In fact, there's some line in the song. I'll have to look it up a little bit later. I can't even remember it, and I don't want to botch it. But the way, I'll just botch it anyway. It says something about I opened my heart up to the world and the world got in. And just the simple poetry of that, almost the heartbrokenness of it, it implies this, like I was willing to think the best of the world, but then the world got into me and now I'm not who I want to be. Like all of that is implied from one sentence. So he's one of the first that come to mind as far as lyricists in answer to your question.
Yeah. And do you find yourself with music studying lyricists and almost trying to unlock them in the way that you would, with the film that you were talking about and the expressions? Do you find yourself being analytical with music as well to really distill the essence and what it is that's making them tick?
No, actually, I don't at all. In fact, it's the exact opposite. I just allow my brain to like subconsciously absorb the phrases and the rhythm of it. A lot of it is just rhythm and how certain, whether it's a verse or a chorus, how the lyrics flow. Like it's all very, very subconscious, and I don't hear lyrics very well, oddly enough. Like I think part of it is maybe the fact that I am a musician and I play primarily guitar, but also drums and bass some. So when I'm listening, I'm focused a lot on the music and the voice and the melody, but the words are like the last thing that I'm focused on. So I really catch only bits and pieces of them as I'm listening, even if it's something I've heard a million times by my favorite band. I couldn't quote you all the lyrics of all the songs that I've heard a million times, but there's bits and pieces of them that are integrated into my thinking. And I do think it comes out in certain sentences, certain rhythmic details and certain words where like I'll choose a different word than maybe what would be expected in the sentence. Like I try to anticipate the expectation of certain sentences and maybe use a different word or a different phrase. Like here's an example. My favorite band of all time is Oasis.
Mm.
And Oasis is not known for being lyrically deep. In fact, Noel Gallagher, who wrote all of Oasis's songs, he makes fun of his own lyrics all the time. But like, take a song like Champagne Supernova, where you've got a line that says, slowly walking down the hall, faster than a cannonball. It's like, wait, what?
Mm.
He paints this picture of slowly walking down a hall and then completely subverts it by using the word faster than a cannonball. And it stops and makes you think and paints this weird visual that makes more sense emotionally than it does logically.
Mm.
And it makes me think of like what Kubrick said, that the truth of a thing is in the feel of it, not the think of it. And I think finding those words that elicit a certain feeling are as important as painting something very specific, is because it gives an audience room to come into it with their own emotions. Like, what does that mean? It's clear, but what am I bringing to it?
Mm.
In fact, there's this old famous story of Noel Gallagher. I think I've probably told this before, but it's worth repeating. Is there was some journalist, they were playing, I think it might have been Nebworth, like some massive concert, 50,000 people.
Yeah.
And this journalist was asking, like they had come off stage and the crowd was chanting for an encore. And the journalist just asked him a question. And he said, like, what are you going to play for your encore? And Noel said, we're going to play Champagne Supernova. And the journalist goes, okay, interesting, because that's a hit. But what does that mean, Noel? I mean, that song, because it's just nonsense, isn't it? And Noel says, listen, when we go out there and play the song and 50,000 people start singing it back, tell me it's nonsense then. Like it hits some emotional truth in some way,
Mm.
Like there are little phrases within that song that are very clear, like, where were you while we were getting high?
Mm.
Is that an accusation? Is there sadness to that? Like, where were you? We needed you there. Things went wrong. Because the whole tone of that song is pretty sad.
Mm.
Someday you'll find me, underneath the landslide.
Mm.
So there's this melancholy to it, but then it's when you pick it apart, you realize that maybe most of the melancholy is what you're bringing to it yourself. And maybe that's what an audience of 50,000 people relates to, is they've brought their own melancholy to a song that is maybe at its core melodically joyful. So it's also in tension with itself. It's melancholy, sad lyrics with a mostly joyful, uplifting melody.
Yeah.
Which I guess is a whole other subject, because I love that. I love that tension as well.
Yeah. It's funny too, the power of music, that you just verbatim saying those lyrics, as an Oasis fan, I can hear the song in my head, and I can't separate it. It's playing now. It's playing in my head.
You're gonna have to listen to it when we're done, huh?
Mm-hmm. I'm potentially gonna listen to it when we take a little break, which is coming up.
Close your eyes, take a listen to the song. Like, don't think about anything else, and just, man, what a tune.
Yeah, it's like, why is Michael taking so long to come back? It's like, oh, God damn it, he's listening to the whole album now. He's got lost. He's in a kind of
I would
Oasis.
Completely understand.
Yeah, in some Oasis trance.
Oh, I was just going to say that, speaking of Oasis, it is I think it was yesterday, it was the 25th anniversary of their album, their third album, Be Here Now, which is kind of a forgotten gem.
Yeah.
It was their follow-up to What's the Story, Morning Glory, and I love that album too.
Yeah, I think, because of it, and it was yesterday, they did put out a number of kind of new formats of that album, so I haven't checked it out yet, but yeah, you are right that one definitely gets overshadowed by What's the Story, Morning Glory. I think they're both fantastic albums.
Yeah, I agree. The Be Here Now is like definitely a cocaine album. Like, it's just over the top. The songs are too long. There's like way too many overdubs, but there's something charming about that excess.
Yeah.
It's like, here's a band on top of the world making the biggest album that they possibly could.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that kind of metaphor or analogy kind of extends with fiction. We can have like a more kind of concise, what's the story, Morning Glory, but there's also absolutely room for an overindulgent cocaine novel, as you put it. Which I love that
for
idea.
sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Something just bloated, and like, I think Stephen doesn't King refers to the Tommyknockers as his novel like that.
Yeah.
And it's got its charm,
I think that was the last one that Bill Thompson edited. I think.
Was that it?
I think it was, because I met Bill, and he was a trip, man. He was at a conference and no one knew who he was. And as soon as they said that he was Stephen King's editor, it's like this guy was like holding the beacon, and every writer at the conference was like, oh, that's the guy, So I actually got a chance to kind of talk with him, because me and two young ladies were actually running the conference. And we was talking about, we were talking about his most famous client. And he says, yeah, man, he goes, you got to damn near wear gloves with the stuff now. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, oh, we get blood, coffee stains, cigarette ashes on there. I'm like, blood? He goes, yeah, we had to have an intervention. So I was like, which he talks about it on writing.
Yeah.
It's, I was like, wow. He said, yeah, man. He goes, there's pages of The Shining that you can't read from the original manuscript.
Wow.
And I was like, but he goes, yeah, he's the number one selling writer in the world. So I was like, wow. That's
no
crazy.
Pressure, huh?
Yeah.
Imagine what that would feel like. Jeez. Create under that kind of weight.
Mm-hmm. They recently posted a picture on social media of him, King, and Peter Straub. And I want to say that the comment that Straub said something to the effect of they were in their like mini beers or something like that at that point. And they look like, it's like, it's from that Dark Forces era,
Oh yeah.
And it's like,
was that like 1980?
Yeah. It's like, these guys are in their prime, look at them. They're so, it's like, wow, that's like, there's so much vibrant energy, and it's like, man, these are some devious motherfuckers right here that have inspired millions. So
that's awesome.
Well, it's fairly known that Chuck Palahniuk has been one of your mentors, but perhaps less people know that you also have received mentorship from Patrick DeWitt.
Yeah.
So I wondered, how did you first get in touch with one another?
So Pat lives here in Portland, and it's actually similar to story to Josh Mallerman in the sense that I was at Powell's when I found Bird Box. Like, I just go to Powell's, wander around, try to keep aware of what's coming out and who's putting it out and who the writers are and all that stuff. And Pat had just come out with his first novel called Ablutions, and the cover is just weird. It's a weird, abstract looking cover. And so I picked it up. It's this little book. It's like 150 pages long. And I was turned to look at the author photo and bio, and it said that he lived here in Portland. I was like, oh, well, that's cool. Like, I always try to keep up on Portland authors as well. Like, there's another local author named Willie Vlotten, who's great. I've been reading his stuff for years, and he and I have hung out a number of times. We used to go to this old horse track called Portland Meadows and hang out, and he's a great guy. Really, he's kind of like a modern day Raymond Carver, but better, I think. And he actually, this is so cool. So Joe Hill is one of my favorite writers, and he just recently tweeted about Willie's last book called The Night Always Comes, and just said it was like one of the best American novels that he's read in like the last 20 years. Which was so cool, because like I've been reading Willie for years, and it was neat to see Joe, experience that book. Anyway, so I bought Ablutions and read it, and the writing is just so like diamond sharp, really unique, especially for, a debut novelist to see that level of confidence in the writing. And there's an edginess to it as well. And so anyway, I reached out to him and said, man, I'd love to just pick your brain about writing. And so we got together, we had dinner and chatted and just stayed in touch after that. We'd meet up a couple times a year and hang out and exchange emails, talk on the phone. And then he came out with this novel that to this day remains one of my all-time favorite books, called The Sisters Brothers. And that book is absolutely amazing. And if anybody listening hasn't read it, seek it out immediately. It is incredible. It's so incredible, in fact, that they made a movie of it, and I never watched the movie because like the book exists in such a sacred place in my mind. And just over the course of our friendship, he offered to read some of my stuff and give me some feedback, which was really gracious of him. And he ended up reading this book, this early novel that I wrote, and some of the feedback that he gave, it was all very, like, he didn't go like page by page, but just gave me this general feel conversation that we had. And at the time, I was reading a lot of, I guess, what you'd call like postmodern literature, like a lot of Don DeLillo and Thomas Pynchon. And I was just really enamored with the way that, like, Thomas Pynchon has this book called, he has Gravity's Rainbow, is really well known, but that book and this other novel he wrote, this doorstop called Against the Day, like, there is something just unhinged about his writing. It's insane. And I loved it. It's like jazz. It's like jazz with words. And I was trying to find my voice in the way that I write, and was really influenced by both of those writers, and trying, as we all do early on, trying to emulate them. But, if you're not, you just can't do it, or I couldn't anyway. And so what would happen is my prose was just all over the place. But then I'd have moments of clarity. And what Pat really highlighted for me was stick to the clarity and then have these moments of being unhinged, but don't spend so much time being unhinged. And that stuck with me ever since, maybe because it came from him, or maybe because it was how he said it. Just really, really stuck with me. And I think he's just an absolutely brilliant writer, brilliant thinker too. He's a blast to talk to, and takes his writing as seriously as I've ever seen anyone take his writing, like in an obsessive kind of way. And I think you can see it in his sentences. They are just so precise and not precise to where all the life is strangled out of them, but precise and freewheeling at the same time. It's just, he's a really remarkable writer, and funny too. Like if you like watch an interview with him, he's a fairly serious person, but serious in the sense like a French philosopher is serious, that he's also playful in his writing, and it comes out in his art. So that's my, fanboy over Patrick deWitt, but incredible writer, and was really, really grateful to get the feedback that I received from him over the years.
Yeah. Are you still in regular contact?
Not as much anymore. It's been a while. He actually doesn't have, this isn't like some secret. I think he's probably talked about it in an interview, if I'm not mistaken, but he doesn't have internet at his house. So he's created this like fortress of solitude. So he really just kind of cuts himself off from the world for a lot of the year while he's writing and working, and I do my best to respect that. And So it's been a little while since we've connected and grabbed a bite to eat, but hopefully soon.
Mm.
I actually, Patrick led me to discover this other writer named Joshua Moore, who wrote a number of novels and then a couple memoirs, which are absolutely fascinating. And his most recent memoir is called Model Citizen, and it came out, I think it was Harper. Anyway, he's one of those guys who put out a number of books through indie presses, and then just recently made the leap to the big five. But I saw him in Josh Moore and Patrick deWitt are friends, and I saw Joshua Moore at Powell's give a reading, and I have never felt so inspired about writing. And it sounds like such a stupid thing to say, like, oh, I saw this writer speak and now I'm inspired. But it was how he spoke about writing, and there's just something so positive. There's a lot of similarities between him and Josh Mallerman. And anyway, Josh, he does some independent editing. I reached out to him. I wrote this novel called Midas that was like this just really big, dark, heavy novel. And I finished the first draft, and I just didn't feel right about it, but I knew that there was something there. It was almost like an ember in a fire. Like there was something glowing at the center of this book, of this story, and I wasn't quite sure how to bring it to life, like for this thing to catch fire. And so I reached out to him, and I've never done this before or since, and asked if he'd be willing to work on the project with me and edit it. Like I really felt that there was something special about this book, and I needed an outside perspective more than just like a friend to beta read it. I needed an objective, someone who could just tear it apart with me. And the experience that I had going through that book with him remains to this day one of the best collaborative writing experiences. And by collaborative, I mean like editorial, and he just has this energy, this positivity, and this uncanny eye for breaking apart a story. And like there's one moment in the book, this scene that I had saved as a reveal, like that occurs like 3/4 of the way through the book. And he was like, that thing right there that you did is the most Tyler Jones thing in this book. Like there is something about this image, this scene, how it's revealed. Like, why are you saving that? That should be the book. And it was like, it just deconstructed everything, blew it apart. And I ended up rewriting the entire book from scratch, with this event as the very center of the story. And I mean, the book as it exists now, it wouldn't be what it is without his eye on it. I am enormously grateful. And that was the book that I ended up sending to Elizabeth Copps, who is now my agent, and we ended up sending it to Paul Miller at Earthling, who is now publishing it. So just reinforcing that, okay, I think there is something about this book that it deserves to have a life, and all of that, not all insignificant part, is due to Josh's influence.
And so when you got Elizabeth as your agent, Elizabeth Copps, did you query a lot of different literary agents? And in fact, irrespective as to whether you did, what was it about Elizabeth that meant that you went with her?
Yeah, the querying process. Oh man. Midas was not the first book that I'd queried. I'd queried two others prior to that, both of which I'm grateful. I mean, not that they weren't good enough to A, get an agent, or B, be published, but I'm grateful now that they weren't, because I learned a lot. Like I wrote a number of novels. The exact number is escaping me at the moment, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of somewhere between 8 and 10 before I wrote Midas. So I'd queried a couple times before, and when I queried, I would send out to 150 agents, which meant between the two books that I'd queried before Midas, somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 rejections.
Yeah.
So, wow. But rejections have never bothered me at all.
I mean, they can't, as a writer, it's part of the job.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it comes too from a background in music. I used to play in bands, and we'd back in the day, pre-internet, where you'd have to send demo tapes or demo CDs to record labels, and they'd send people out to shows. I was just used to it. Not everybody's going to like what you're doing, and that's fine. You're looking for the people who get it, who connect with it. So with Midas, same thing. I queried probably 150 agents, and I had some who were interested. And in answer to your question with Elizabeth, she represents both Philip Fracassi and Andy Davidson, two writers that I admire greatly. And they both just had glowing things to say about her and her work ethic, her approach to things, her enthusiasm, all of that. And it seemed like a really, really good fit. And she read Midas, and her enthusiasm for the book and the story just completely sold me. I thought, yeah, you're the right person for this. And that's what I'd been looking for, was that kind of reaction.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually early into the querying agents process at the moment. And
oh, wow.
I mean, you said one of the things that appealed was her having Fracassi and Davidson. And I mean, that's kind of similar to my approach, that I'll look at, okay, who are the authors that I think, if people liked what they were doing, they might like what Michael David Wilson is doing. And then kind of find out, okay, well, who's their agent? And then, like you, reach out to the author if you're in contact with them, and ask them, how's your agent? And depending on the response will depend on whether you decide to query that one. But
yeah, it's so important. And Philip Fracassi has been something of a recent mentor to me in the last couple years. Like, he's been so generous with his time and just so gracious to answer questions. And I'm really grateful to call him a friend now. And I mean, I admire his work enormously, and he's such a good guy, and he's helped me answer more questions than he had any right to answer or I had any right to ask, but he's been so gracious. But with the agent thing, I think one of the most important things, like anybody out there who's querying as well, I would if I was asked for one piece of advice, it would be this: be really, really honest with yourself and your work. And by that, I mean, I queried 2 novels that, when they were rejected by every agent that I possibly thought would be interested, and it's not a joke, I kept an Excel file, like it was 150 more. I admitted something to myself, that this isn't the book. So take a good, honest look. If it's being rejected by 150 people, are they all wrong, or are you wrong? And the answer was me. The book wasn't good enough. And once I looked at it objectively and with humility, I realized that it's not all these agents who aren't seeing my brilliance. It's me querying a book that doesn't have a chance of success. So then I immediately shelved, like, okay, on to the next. Write something better. And I think that I've seen firsthand a number of writers who they've spent so much time on a novel that they become really, really connected to it. And I get it. but it makes them unable to see its flaws. And so they are continually querying a flawed book that most likely won't get accepted. And that can be a really hard pill to swallow, to say, like, I spent, 8 months writing this novel and maybe it's not good enough, or maybe it needs a lot more work, either one. But in my case, the two novels that I queried, I thought were irredeemably flawed. And I was over them. Like, my emotional connection to the book was done. But that's just me. Like, that's how I operate. I can't hang on to something for years and years and this is it. This is the one. I'm done with it. I want to move on and try and write something better. So I just let go of those, and that's when I moved on and wrote Midas and just poured absolutely everything that I had at the time into it. And yeah, after writing that one, I knew, like I said, I felt in my gut that there was something about that book. And even if it never got an agent, I think I'd still either release it myself or see if a small press was interested in it. But I just believed in it so strongly, and that's why I reached out to Joshua Mordet to help me see what I couldn't see, because I believed in that core idea and the core story of it so much. And I didn't feel that way about the other books that I ditched.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I would say, is just, be honest with yourself about, like, take a good hard look at the book, and not you personally, but just anybody. If you're struggling, if like 150 rejections have come in, have that talk with yourself and be like, okay, is it me or is it everyone else?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, and there's so much to unpack. But as you've repeated, I think the headline or the overriding piece of advice is be honest with yourself. Because, 150 agents rejecting a book, that certainly does not mean, by itself that the book is flawed or that the book doesn't have any artistic merit or any value. But I think you've already covered that by saying, if you look at Midas, that is a book that you believe in. So you could get 1,500 rejections. If you can even find that amount of agents, and you would still put it out. But if you get that many rejections, you probably need to have that conversation with yourself, and you need to be as honest as possible. But the answer might be that you do believe in this novel and that you do want to put it out. So I just thought, it's worth stating that point, because, I know of people who have queried this kind of amount of people, and their story is pretty damn good. It just might be that it's not quite what an agent is looking for at this specific time, because the publishing industry can be fickle. It can be that there are trends that go around, that it can just be that, unfortunately, your novel, which is great, is also too similar to another novel from another author. So there are so many things that could be going on. So I just don't want someone to have 150 rejections and then think, okay, well, this novel that I believed in, it can't be any good because of this. But that's where the being honest with yourself comes in.
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a good point. I'm glad that you brought that up, because in being honest with myself, what I realized is that I didn't believe in those books like I believe in Midas. So it was me, but it was also the book, and it was also my belief in the book. So you're absolutely right. Whereas with Midas, if I sent it out and I never got an agent, you're absolutely right. I'd still put it out because I believe in it, where I didn't feel that way with the others. So the honesty, yes, it goes both ways. It extends externally and internally.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that you mention Philip Fracassi, because I think there are a number of commonalities between you and Fracassi, not even just in the writing, but in terms of the career trajectory. I mean, both of you have started off independently putting things out and choosing yourselves. And now, obviously, you've both moved into a more traditional publishing route, for the next releases. I mean, the great thing with the industry is we can almost do things on a book by book basis. If you get a traditional deal, it doesn't mean, oh, now I only put things out traditionally.
Yeah.
And we're seeing more and more what might be termed hybrid authors. I mean, you look at Adam Neville, you look at David Moody in the UK. Potentially, you look at Gemma Amor. I only say potentially because she's just got the deal with Angry Robot, so I don't know what she's going to do in the future. Although I suppose I can ask her because we're going to be talking to her in a few weeks.
Yeah. Well, tell her I said hello.
Okay. I'll
She did
include that as part of the conversation.
Well, she did the really beautiful cover art for Almost Ruth.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, she did. And actually, as we're talking about Gemma Amor, I know that Gemma Amor's Dear Laura, and specifically being nominated for a Bram Stoker Award, was a very inspiring moment for you, and one in which it showed you, what can be achieved with independent publishing. So I wondered if you could talk us a little bit about that, talk us through that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that was really significant for me because as we all know, when you're outside publishing, and I still am to a certain extent, like I have a glimpse, but I'm not I'm not like, say, Fracassi where he's at exactly, it is funny that you mentioned the career trajectories because I will admit without shame. In fact, he made this joke. We were talking on the phone a couple months ago, and I was asking him some questions, and he was like, "Man, you're following the Fracassi model of success." I was like, "Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. I'm watching what you're doing, and yeah, I'm like, if it works for you, maybe I'll give it a shot. Why not? Like, I'm not going to go forge an entirely new path." But anyway, so yeah, in regards to Gemma and Dear Laura, yeah, seeing that, just it was like the indie musician in me just cheered wildly because it was so cool to see these really esteemed awards in this self-published book, illustrated. She made the cover art herself too. Get on that list like that. And so prior to that, I'd been thinking, okay, all I knew about publishing was, like, we'd mentioned Patrick deWitt and Willie Vlotten and even Joshua Moore, who he and Pat actually shared an agent at the time. I don't know if they still do, but they did. So all I knew was that agents want novels. So you write a novel, you query an agent, and that's the only way you're going to get published. And I didn't even know that. I mean, at the time, this was, 4 or 5 years ago, even longer than that, actually, that, like, indie publishing, I just assumed that they were accepting manuscripts through agents as well. So I just thought the agent is the key that unlocks all the doors. And they only want novels. So good luck. Like, you just write a novel. If that doesn't work, try to write another one. And then seeing what was happening with self-publishing and indie writers was really inspiring to see people saying, we're going to build our own audiences. We're going to write stories that we believe in, that are strong. We're going to put them out, and we're going to let the audiences decide. And that just seemed so wise to me. And because I was antsy to get work out, not like as an ego thing, but just like, that's the point of telling stories, is you want to share them. And seeing the novella too as a form that it seemed to be really ideal for self-publishing, because it wasn't as long, and especially if it's like your first published work, it just seemed like the perfect form. And so seeing that book really it gave me the confidence, I guess, to say I'm gonna put out something on my own. So I'm gonna hold back Midas. I'm gonna hang on to Midas, and I'm not gonna let it go until I've been rejected by every agent and every publisher, and then I will either put it out myself or go the indie route. But I'm gonna swing big with this book, or at least as best as I can. But in the meantime, I'm seeing the examples of all these incredible writers putting out work on their own. So I'll just do that in the meantime. And that's what started everything in 2020 with Criterium. Is I had Midas, and I started querying agents in 2020, actually in February of 2020. And then, as you know, the pandemic hit in March, which was a terrible time to be waiting to hear back from agents. So I just said, all right, we'll see what happens. And in the meantime, I'll write stories I want to write and put them out myself. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And there are so many incredible indie writers that I was looking at the time who were doing that. Gemma was one. Adam Caesar was another. I'm kind of drawing a blank, but I mean, the Keelan Patrick Burke, all our friends and colleagues that have been doing this. They paved a path. I saw what they were doing. I saw how well they were doing it. It just made sense.
Thank you so much for listening to This Is Horror with Tyler Jones. Join us again next time for the third and final part of the conversation. But if you would like to get that ahead of the crowd, if you would like to get every episode ahead of the crowd, then join us on Patreon at patreon.com/thisishorror. Not only do you get early bird access to each and every episode, but you get to submit questions to each guest. And we've got a number of exciting guests coming up, including Jonathan Jans, Sina Paleo, Will Carver, and Brian Asman. And we're also in the middle of booking some pretty unusual and creative guests that you probably wouldn't expect to see on This Is Horror, but I am personally very excited for what we have coming up for you. So fingers crossed that that'll all come together. And supporting us on Patreon is a way to give back. This is, of course, something that we put hours of our time in each week, researching, reading, conducting these interviews, editing it all together, paying for the web hosting, putting the graphics together, etc., etc. And if you like it, if you want it to continue, then please do become our patron. You also get access to the Writers Forum on Discord, so you can talk to other like-minded writers about what you're doing. You can get beta readers, you can exchange ideas, you can motivate each other, you can take part in the writing challenges. So plenty of reasons to become a patron. I like to have the philosophy to undercharge and over-deliver, and that is something I really do feel we're doing with Patreon. So go to patreon.com/thisishorror, check it out, and see if it's a good fit for you. Okay, before I wrap up, a little bit of an advert break.
Horror on Main, a new weekend convention for the horror community. Exploring all the shadows of horror, our guests include writers and actors, but also artists, publishers, directors, composers, and more. We've been going to cons for over 20 years and are changing up the little things to make the big picture amazing. Beyond guests, contests, movies, panels, and podcasters, our layout and programming are designed to further incorporate the very idea of community. Join us Memorial Day weekend 2023 in Hunt Valley, Maryland. Come to the block party and meet your new neighbors. HorrorOnMain.com. Tried and true or done to death. It was all a dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, revives even the most exhausted cliches with stories from some of horror's biggest names like Gemma Files, Gabino Iglesias, and Haley Piper. It was all a dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, available October 18th anywhere you buy books online. Pre-order now. Use this code ThisIsHorror for 20% off through the month of October when you order direct from HungryShadowPress.com.
As always, I would like to end with a quote, and this is something from John Steinbeck to ponder. All the goodness and the heroisms will rise up again, then be cut down again and rise up. It isn't that the evil thing wins, it never will, but that it doesn't die. I'll see you in the next episode for the third and final part with Tyler Jones. But until then, take care of yourselves, be good to one another, read horror, keep on writing, and have a great, great day.
This is Horror Podcast.